I thought about killing myself today. In the classic South Korean action movie Old Boy, we follow Oh Dae-soo as he is suddenly kidnapped and forced into a sealed hotel room. When pleading with a man who mechanically brings him food to keep him alive, the first thing he asks is, why is he here? When he doesn't get an answer, he asks a different question, hoping this series of words will cause him to take mercy.
아저씨, 나 언제까지 있어야 되는데? 나 그것만 좀 가르쳐줘. 아저씨, 야, 이 씨발, 개새끼, 너 이리 와. 이 씨발, 이 개새끼야, 너 씨발놈아 얼굴 봤어 너 나가면 죽어 이 개새끼. 이리 와. 씨발, 미안해, 욕 안 할게. 나 그만 가르쳐줘. 진짜 한 달 아니면 두 달이야? 아니 세 달. 야, 그것만 좀 가르쳐달라니까, 이 씨발놈들아!
Knowing would likely have helped ease him. There's a certain anxiety in not knowing when you'll get out. Year after year passes until your conscious mind knows there's no hope, but some deep, primal instinct within you keeps hope alive against your wishes. That mismatch of mental states causes anxiety. You know not the way out, only that there is a way out, and it isn't accessible to you. It's a feeling that is perhaps most striking in families who have had loved ones disappear suddenly one day. After many years, you may even hope for any news, even if that news is of your loved one's death. Though the news of the hopelessness of your situation may disappoint, there's an undoubtable closure it brings as well, and that closure may heal more than anything. Dysthymia, or persistent depressive disorder, is a chronic mental illness characterized by a low mood that never ends, that persists for many months or even years. In my case, I can only assume it's gone on for decades, because I can't remember a time in which I didn't have this problem. This feeling that life isn't for me, the feeling that nothing I do, no activity nor event nor anything I can think of can raise even the slightest wisp of happiness in me, that everything is meaningless in the context of my life, because anything I do stirs no emotion but the strong desire for the Sisyphean task I'm trapped in to end. Most diagnosed cases of chronic depression fall under major depressive disorder, or MDD. The difference between the two is that MDD requires less time spent being depressed for a diagnosis, but it causes deeper, darker depressive episodes than with dysthymia. For people with MDD, things like distractions from their current depressive episode with things that would normally raise their spirits are often short-term solutions that are presented to people who suffer from the illness. Such a thing is less effective for dysthymia because every single activity usually creates nothing but a further alienation from the concept of life itself. In my case, I have both illnesses, the worst of both worlds in an unholy matrimony referred to as double depression. It effectively means that I spend every waking moment in a sort of mild depressive state, which is often interrupted by episodes of intense, usually suicidal depression. And the longer it goes on, the more I see myself banging on that door like Oh Dae-soo with instruments used to keep me placated. For Oh Dae-soo, the metal tray on which food was carried into his room. For me, any of the few meaningless products I have that I think will cause me enough pain that I wake from this horrible dream I'm stuck in. Oh Dae-soo spends 15 years stuck in that hotel room until he's finally able to dig a tunnel out. And the moment he has his freedom, he's gassed and thrown out of the room by the people who put him there in the first place, as though to deny him any agency and clawing his way from the depths of that prison. One of the things he does is recount his story to a man who's about to kill himself, but when the man seeks to recount his story in solidarity, Oh Dae-soo leaves him. I don't know if in those eyes lay fear of hearing the struggle of another, or simple disinterest, but something about Oh Dae-soo's struggle caused him to consider only his struggle as important in that moment. And that man was able to interpret that message from what Oh Dae-soo did and likely believed it, for he did what one does when you realize you are nothing. You render yourself to nothing. Oh Dae-soo presumably could have found some way to kill himself in that room. If he could have found a way to dig himself out, why didn't he? At some point early in his imprisonment, he decided that vengeance would be what drives him. Vengeance against those who wronged him. What drives me then? Why am I still here, speaking these words? I fear that such reasonings, vengeance, love, hate, are but excuses to hide the true evolutionary response for why I've still taken no action. Fear. Imagine a space, infinitely large, in which you can see what lies directly ahead or behind you, for there are no lights in this room, no furniture, no ornaments, nothing but you and the infinite void. I'm referring to the Navenson house in Mark Z. Danielewski's horror masterpiece House of Leaves. The space starts off as a discrepancy only of around half an inch between the interior and the exterior of Will Navenson's house, but soon expands wildly out of control into a colossal behemoth of a room that spits in the face of how we think things should work. Of that story, we tell ourselves that we've got everything figured out. It is an eldritch disruption to that status quo, something that, despite not being visible from the outside of the house, cannot be ignored. For the call to enter it, to know what lies within those depths, is deafening, so that whether within or without its walls, you'll be driven mad by its nature, so long as it is a part of your life. What strikes me is the incredible claustrophobia this room creates. Despite likely being the largest structure known to humanity, possibly infinite in scope, the blackness of that room wraps around you like nothing else can. Since nothing else lies in the room, the darkness becomes an entity in itself. Everyone surrounds you to the point that it weighs you down, constantly preventing you from moving. Or is that the fear again? I feel then a certain understanding when I imagine what it would be like were I born in such a room, by myself, with no sense of direction or way to get out, and knowing nothing but that others, most others in fact, live in a different world. A world with direction, with many outs, ways of maneuvering, a world where one can have a concern without it being drowned out by the loud, pressing issue of getting out. I know that nothing would be more important than getting out. Anything that concerns me would have to be secondary to escaping that blackness. I imagine then that sometimes I can hear people passing by, their footsteps echoing in the distance, and I call out to them and beg for help, tears filling my eyes. I know they can hear me, but I get no response. Then I realize why Odysseus left that man. When you have a way out of the blackness, you must avoid anything that may drag you back in, any area where you may not know the way back to yourself. And I find that disgusting. I hope that if one day I escape the room, I'll at least have the decency to put myself at risk to help those who are in the same position. I hope that whatever happiness I'd gain wouldn't change that. Because if I don't do something to help, no one else will, unless you have 100 per hour to pay. Thinking about the moral implications of that action, though, brings me to the ultimate question of which is harder, being born in the blackness or being trapped in the blackness after knowing the outside world. I assume that if they have a way out, then they may not have started out here. I don't know many people who started out here. My thoughts then shoot back to me, less than 10 years old, the sun washing the sky with the final dark orange hue it has, and I'm watching TV in my grandfather's room, the final arc of Naruto, when Sasuke says something that I don't forget. I don't forget it, because this whole time I'd empathized solely with Naruto, never truly understanding Sasuke's actions.
Just shut up for once. What the heck do you know about it? It's not like you ever had a family in the first place. You were on your own right from the beginning! What makes you think you know anything about it, huh? I'm suffering now because I had those ties. How on earth could you possibly understand what it feels like to lose all that?
I'm in the present again, still in blackness, and I realize it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who had it worse, not for their situation nor mine, because either way, siding with the main villain of the series Orochimaru is wrong, and leaving people in the dark because you're too scared to help is wrong, even if I can understand taking those actions.
This is the saddest lesson of terror. She wrote her memoirs as a young girl. She was in Auschwitz, and something traumatic happened to her. After her stay in Auschwitz, she survived. She went later to Israel. I think it was like this. And she was shocked to see there another Auschwitz survivor with numbers tattooed. making brutal attacks on Arabs, barbarians, and so on. And then she wrote, I had the saddest ethical insight. No, there is nothing liberating in extreme suffering, you know. Auschwitz was also, in this sense, an ethical catastrophe. It's not that if you survive Auschwitz as a victim, you will be absolutely sensitive to all suffering. No, you will also suffer the consequences. That's the saddest lesson of terror. We should drop this humanist idea, he really suffered, so he will know suffering of others. Unfortunately, no.
In PT, the playable teaser for Silent Hills, you're made to walk down corridors of mostly identical length and proportion, variations appearing every time you reach the beginning of the loop of those two hallways. It becomes clear that, as in most Silent Hill games, these hallways are some bizarre supernatural punishment for something. The narrow hallways drill into your head that there is no escape from danger, that if someone or something wants to harm you, there is no place to run or hide. Advancing forward is the only viable option if you want to escape, despite the fact that you don't know if there's an end to these looping hallways. Still though, as long as you're able to complete the game's creepy puzzles to move on to the next area, you'll be fine. There's not much to think about besides getting to the next room. Until... This is when you realize that this promise of an escape through constant advancement is a lie. Escape and death become one in this moment, which is why I feel such fear in this scene. That woman is the physical embodiment of the fear that all that time spent walking in these hallways in the hopes of escape were for nothing. That escape and death are inseparable. And to a suicidal person, that shouldn't be such a scary thing to face, but it is, because if you could choose our fears, I would have no fear. My mind keeps the hope that there's some alternative to walking straight towards that woman's embrace and accepting my punishment. After all, isn't that why I'm here? But there's the entire rest of the game to finish. There's that famous ending with Norman Reedus to see. Why? Why is there more after this? If I can avoid my death, then why make it so that I want to embrace it in the first place? Well, because PT is a game directed by Hideo Kojima, because he didn't think that far into it, because that woman is a fucking game mechanic, not the embodiment of my fear of death. And that game was made by people who had intention behind how they designed the game. But the intention wasn't to punish me or anyone who played it. So why do I think that my days spent in depression are a punishment from the uncaring, unthinking universe? It's just a game after all.